Over the years, countless cases of missing individuals have been made public, some more popular than others. However, very few cases ever turn up in which officials and investigative teams are unable to find even a shred of evidence pertaining to the missing person. Here are 5 such cases where individuals simply vanished without a trace. Number 5. Back in 1969, an American musician by the name of Jim Sullivan recorded and released an album which he titled UFO. The album was a work of art that Jim had been involved in for several months, though the songs featured extremely odd lyrics that only grew more bizarre as the album progressed. Fans noted that every song contained lyrics of Jim's belief that he would have to leave his family and the possibility of being abducted by aliens in the near future. Just 6 years after the album's eventual release, Jim vanished without a trace, and the only piece of evidence that he left behind was his abandoned car that was found on the side of the road in a deserted area. Jim's story made headlines a short while later in 1975, after it was revealed that he'd vanished without leaving so much as a letter behind. According to his family, he left his home in Los Angeles on March 4th, 1975, headed toward Nashville. He left alone in his Volkswagen Beetle and planned to go to Nashville to further his music career. The following morning, he checked into a motel near Santa Rosa, New Mexico. However, what's odd is that he didn't even sleep at the motel. He simply stayed there for a bit, then continued on his way. He was last seen the following day about 26 miles from a ranch home which was owned by a family known as the Janettis. It doesn't appear that he ever had any contact with the family, and he was never seen again after this witness report, though his car was strangely found to have been parked nearby the ranch and his guitar was found inside of it. According to fans of the album, he describes his disappearance almost perfectly. He mentions several long highways throughout the lyrics and throughout the album, and discusses leaving his family behind and traveling alone. This may seem normal enough for a touring musician, however, he also makes references to being abducted in the desert by aliens. The lyrics paint far too accurate of a picture to say that they aren't somehow related to his disappearance. Number 4. Frederic Valentin is a name that's likely to be familiar to any amateur unsolved mystery hunter. Frederic was an extremely experienced pilot who was located in Australia. Later into the evening, on October 21st, 1978, Frederic was out for a routine flight near the Bass Strait in Australia. He was traveling over the area at about 7:05 p.m. when he called into the Melbourne Flight Service and reported that he was seeing an unidentified object about 4,500 feet from his vessel. The crew at the station checked into the issue, but Frederic was informed that there was no craft to be seen on radar in his surrounding area. He called back to the station and informed them that he was certainly seeing a large aircraft, which was illuminated by 4 bright orbs of light, and that it was some sort of craft that he'd never seen before. Frederic stated that the craft seemed to be approaching him from the east. As his flight continued on, he added that it appeared to be orbiting around him, almost as if it were toying with him. As the craft continued around him, he described it as being metallic with a green light on it. The craft didn't have any sort of paint or identifiable marks aside from the lights. Frederic almost immediately began to report to the flight service that he was experiencing fatal engine issues. He called back to the station once more and stated it isn't an aircraft. After this, all transmissions were cut and all communication with Frederic was lost. Workers who were present the night of his disappearance stated that just before the communications were halted entirely, a metallic scraping noise was heard over the radio. Afterward, a 1,000 square mile search was set up that covered both land and sea. However, not a single trace of Frederic was ever found. It was as though he had simply vanished without leaving behind a single nut, bolt, or screw from his aircraft. To this day, no evidence of his flight has ever been found. It was as though he simply vanished into thin air. Number 3. Jim Gray was a well-accomplished man who worked for Microsoft. He was a highly skilled scientist and Turing Award winner. He left San Francisco Bay on a sailboat, allegedly heading out to scatter his mother's ashes. He planned on making landfall at a small batch of islands that were located just a few miles from the shore. He was reported missing by his loved ones when he failed to return home from the trip later on that day. According to workers and officials who were present at the time, Jim Gray's disappearance led to one of the most thorough land-sea searches in the country's history. Still, not a single trace of him was ever found. On January 28, 2007, Jim planned to take his somewhat short trip. He planned on sailing alone, would leave his yacht once he reached the island, and planned to scatter his mother's ashes and return immediately home. At around 10:30 a.m., he called his wife back home, still aboard his yacht. 2 hours later, his boat was seen sailing near the islands that he planned to visit. After this, no additional reports of Jim were ever issued by nearby potential witnesses. The Coast Guard never received any emergency radio signals. Jim's boat was equipped with sophisticated technology that would alert nearby emergency services if his boat began to sink. However, no services ever received any emergency contact from the device. Other sailors who were nearby the area never reported seeing his boat, and Jim's vehicle completely vanished without a single trace of evidence left behind. 5 years later, there's yet to be a single piece of debris from his boat to wash ashore, leading many to question whether or not he even wrecked his boat, or if something even more mysterious may have taken place. He was legally declared dead in 2012. Number 2. Judge Joseph Carter was a well-known judge in his area when he mysteriously vanished after leaving a restaurant on August 6, 1930. Following his attendance at the diner, he was never seen or heard from again. According to many, while his disappearance never turned up any valuable information, it did lead to an overall distrust of the New York City Police Department. This is due to the fact that following an in-depth investigation, countless cases of corruption were uncovered and made public, though Judge Carter's case remained unsolved. Joseph was a New York Supreme Court justice who vanished while in the midst of a major political scandal. On the night of his disappearance, he'd been having dinner with 2 close friends, who later said that they last saw him walking down the street in the opposite direction from them after exiting the diner. After this, no other witness reports were submitted, and it seemed as though Joseph had simply vanished while only blocks away from the busy area of Times Square. His disappearance was never made public until September 3rd, nearly a month later. This led to a massive search team, but during the investigation, it was discovered that Joseph had destroyed countless incriminating documents before his disappearance. This led to many believing that rather than being kidnapped or worse, he had actually left town of his own free will as a means to escape criminal penalty for his potential wrongdoings. Police soon found out that his safety deposit boxes had all been emptied and $5,000 was removed from his bank account. Still to this day, 90 years later, the case remains unsolved. Number 1. Harold Holt was the Prime Minister of Australia. One day, he went for a swim near the Cheviot beach, though he never returned to shore. Witnesses say that he simply disappeared into the water and was never seen again. Following his disappearance, the largest manhunt in Australian history was set up, but not a single shred of evidence was found. At the time of his disappearance, on December 17, 1967, Harold was actively serving as the Prime Minister of his country. He'd been in office for about 22 months and planned to head to Melbourne with his daughter, his neighbor, and some family friends. They were scheduled to see the well-known yachtsman Alec Rose travel through the area. At around 12 p.m., they traveled to one of Harold's favorite swimming spots on Cheviot Beach near Port C. According to witnesses, the waters were extremely turbulent that day. Holt, however, decided to swim anyway. While out swimming, his family said that he simply disappeared from their view. Rescue personnel were immediately called, but no trace of him was ever found. Holt was known to have been a strong swimmer and experienced with diving, but he simply never returned to the water's surface. Still to this day, no evidence of his body, clothing, or absolutely anything from his body has ever been found. His case has remained cold for over 5 decades. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this narration, maybe consider checking out my personal channel at youtube.com/ty_knots. And if you like this video, be sure to click that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads.